I just want to go and actually confirm that this is streaming before I make any rash decisions about starting. Let's see. YouTube Studio. I have no email. Oh wait, yes I do. Cool. Alright, well YouTube, welcome to an exciting new era. I'm just going to take off this mask as just a little visual gag for you. I am using a microphone and OBS Studio. I'm pretty sure that I do not have this microphone set up properly, so the audio quality is probably not going to be any different than it ever was, but yeah, I mean, I'm using OBS here, so you get to see the document that we're going to be reading, and you get a nice color, a nice purple, and that's it. So what am I doing here? We are going to be inaugurating a new series, a new type of video content where we actually read things together on screen here. I'll be going through the PDF of this essay. I'm sure you can already guess since it says right here, temporary autonomous zone. And hopefully I'll do my best to make it somewhat more interesting than previous readings that I've done, where I just actually read the text without any consideration for, an audience, anybody watching. Hopefully I'll be able to give some commentary. I've read about, I only read 2 or 3 sections of this essay, so it's not like I have a lot of prepared statements or anything. But yeah, we're going to be reading the Temporary Autonomous Zone essay, a famous essay by Mr. Hakim Bey, noted pedophile and NAMBLA ideologue. Just going to be going through it because it's pretty topical right now, with the Chaz Chop just getting shut down. And I don't really know what's happening in New York City, but for a while there was an occupation at City Hall. Hopefully they're doing all right over there. And yeah, we're just gonna see what the anarchists have to offer. Not much. Spoiler alert. It's a rainy, extremely humid, hot day here in Montreal. It's getting around the end of a very brutal heat wave that lasted several days. Still don't have so much of a fan in my apartment, but the rain did break it a bit. It's made it a lot more humid. Anyway, let's get started with this. The cool thing about OBS is that I can actually look at the PDF and not have to look at my stupid face. But let's get started. So it starts on page 88. I'll put wait a second, how does this work? It's live right now, so presumably if you're watching this along with me, I don't actually know how to edit the description to have a link to the PDF. Wait, let me just do that right now. I just want to put a link to the PDF so that anybody who comes in will be able to follow along with me. I have to figure out how to edit the video description and the title and everything from within OBS. I'm sure there's a way to do it anyway. That's done. Alright, so moving on, it's page 88 of the PDF here. Let's go find that. I've looked. I actually have the book copy of this. Bought it many years ago at the Montreal Anarchist Book Fair. I never got around to reading it. because at the time I was reading more interesting things like Tikkun and the Invisible Committee, which is like pretty similar style of shit, like of a revolutionary theory, but also just like way more interesting to me at least. But having looked through the rest of the contents in this book, it's actually like pretty disgusting. Like and like the kind of stuff that he does here. Like I first read on his Wikipedia page that he is like he like supports NAMBLA and is like a pedophile, and then after like flipping through here, there's so much weird shit in here. Like young children have beautiful feet. It's just like a slogan, a graffiti slogan that he wanted to spray paint around, and he's like a really repugnant figure. And this text itself is like a very classic example of that kind of like 80s, 90s, like techno utopian libertarian kind of nonsense. It's the kind of thing that just like absolutely had no, like you can tell that it has absolutely no bearing in material reality, because none of the things that they predicted or hoped for even remotely came to pass. Like it was, the internet turned out to be the exact opposite as like these 90s style libertarians were hoping for. Rather than a utopia, it's become like the it's like classic like William Gibson was able to predict to a much greater degree how the internet would turn out, which is like a dystopian corporate ruled nightmare. Anyway, let's get started here. The epigraph. So, this time, however, I come as the victorious Dionysus, who will turn the world into a holiday. Not that I have much time. Nietzsche, from his last insane letter to Cosima Wagner. Cosima Wagner is like the wife of Richard Wagner, and he was pretty close to both of them throughout most of his life. She was like very important for his early intellectual development and his professional development as well. Nietzsche, a favorite of this channel. Chapter 1, Pirate Utopias. I'm just going to close the window here. I'm going to take a moment to... I really didn't want to do that because it's very hot in the moment. Audio quality. Chapter 1, Pirate Utopias. The sea rovers and corsairs of the 18th century created an information network that spanned the globe. Primitive and devoted primarily to grim business, the net nevertheless functioned admirably. So right here you have an example of that kind of libertarian thinking. Scattered throughout the net were islands, remote hideouts where ships could be watered and provisioned, booty traded for luxuries and necessities. Some of these islands supported intentional communities, whole mini-societies living consciously outside the law and determined to keep it up, even if only for a short but merry life. I would really like to see the racial and gendered dynamics that were present in these kinds of pirate utopias. I doubt that they are the utopian spaces that Mr. Bey is making them out to be. Some years ago, I looked through a lot of secondary material on piracy, hoping to find a study of these enclaves, but it appeared as if no historian has yet found them worthy of analysis. William Burroughs has mentioned the subject, as did the late British anarchist Larry Law, but no systematic research has been carried out. So I'll just mention at this point William Burroughs, who I really like some of his novels, but he was like Hakim Bey, whose real name is something else. Let me just check here. His real name is Peter Lamborn Wilson. So Peter and William were good buds. I think they like lived together for a while. They like worked together, were mutual influences on each other. And William Burroughs is like pretty fondly remembered, I think. And like some of his works are like quite good, I think. But he is also like a repugnant figure, like a sex tourist, orientalist, pedophile, that sort of thing. So it's not surprising that these two people were so closely associated. William Burroughs has mentioned the subject as the late British anarchist Larry Law. I don't know who Larry Law is, but no systematic research has been carried out. I retreated to primary sources and constructed my own theory, some aspects of which will be discussed in this essay. I called the sediments pirate utopias. Recently, Bruce Sterling, one of the leading exponents of cyberpunk science fiction, published a near-future romance based on the assumption that the decay of political systems will lead to a decentralized proliferation of experiments in living. Giant worker-owned corporations, independent enclaves devoted to data piracy, green social democratic enclaves, zero-work enclaves, anarchist liberated zones, etc. The information economy, which supports this diversity, is called the net. The enclaves and the book's title are islands in the net. So I referenced William Gibson earlier as having like a pretty good prediction in Neuromancer, which is written in the 80s, of how the internet would turn out and how like technology would affect society in like severely dystopian ways. Bruce Sterling, I've only read the book that he wrote with William Gibson called The Difference Engine, which is like an alternate history about what's his name? Turing, the guy who like invented the first computer when it was just like punch cards and like a thing moving or whatever. I don't know if there's like electricity involved, but it's like kind of alternate history. I don't even remember what the plot was. It was so convoluted and like not well written. I've read a bunch of William Gibson. I used to read him a lot when I was a teenager, and that was certainly the worst thing that I've ever read from him, which he co-wrote with Bruce Sterling, who is here making a totally specious prediction about how the internet will turn out. So that's interesting. The medieval assassins founded a state which consisted of a network of remote mountain valleys and castles, separated by thousands of miles, strategically invulnerable to invasion, connected by the information flow of secret agents at war with all governments and devoted only to knowledge. Modern technology, culminating in the spy satellite, makes this kind of autonomy a romantic dream. No more pirate islands. In the future, the same technology, freed from all political control, can make possible an entire world of autonomous zones. But for now, the concept remains precisely science fiction, pure speculation. So this whole thing about the assassins is reminding me of a pretty like cool science fiction series that I read called the Illuminatus trilogy. I've been thinking about it a lot recently just because it's shares a lot with something that I'm working on, but and there's also a quote on the back of this text of the actual book from Robert Anton Wilson, who is one of the authors of the Illuminatus trilogy. But a big part of that is like a total like stoner, like pot smoking kind of mythology, and a big part of it is the assassins, who are like I have no idea if this is true or not. But they like started out as like a hashish worshippers. Assassin means like hashish worshipper or something, and it kind of like depicts them in this way of having this like network of like communities that are like separated and able to work together, whatever. Are we who live in the present doomed never to experience autonomy, never to stand for one moment on a bit of land ruled only by freedom? Are we reduced either to nostalgia for the past or nostalgia for the future? Must we wait until the entire world is freed of political control before even one of us can claim to know freedom? Logic and emotion unite to condemn such a supposition. Reason demands that one cannot struggle for what one does not know, and the heart revolts at a universe so cruel as to visit such injustices on our generation alone of humankind. total victim complex here. Our generation alone of humankind. Again, like just completely like divorced from the actual like material conditions that affect society and the world, that were affecting society and the world at his time. If he had any kind of like connection or understanding of what was actually happening in the world, he would understand that the sort of thing that he's talking about here is absolutely not, like, he would not have this fucking victim complex. He'd be talking about how it would be getting worse for future generations, which is, again, like what William Gibson was talking about. Like, his books are set in a near future. So he understood that, like, they kind of like this lack of freedom or whatever that he's bemoaning here is not, he's not like the sole victim of it, or his generation of freaking boomers are not the sole victim of it, but it's something that is only going to get worse and worse as time goes on, not better, as he's trying to pick up a bit. To say that I will not be free till all humans or all sentient creatures are free is simply to cave into a kind of nirvana stupor, to abdicate our humanity, to define ourselves as losers. No. Such privilege. Such privilege. I believe that by extrapolating from past and future stories about islands in the net, we may collect evidence to suggest that a certain kind of free enclave is not only possible in our time, but also existent. All my research and speculation has crystallized around the concept of the temporary autonomous zone, hereafter abbreviated TAZ. Despite its synthesizing force for my own thinking, however, I don't intend the TAZ to be taken as more than an essay, attempt, a suggestion, almost a poetic fancy. It sure is a poetic fancy. Despite the occasional ranterish enthusiasm of my language, I am not trying to construct political dogma. In fact, I have deliberately refrained from defining the TAZ. I circle around the subject, firing off exploratory beams. In the end, the TAZ is almost self-explanatory. If the phrase became current, it would be understood without difficulty, understood in action. Circle around the subject, firing off exploratory beams. It's very typical of, I guess, just writing that is influenced by postmodernism, and anarchism is like the most, or at least its contemporary strain, I feel like is the most postmodern political ideology. This idea, like we saw it in aesthetic theory as well, this idea of like not actually trying to approach the subject directly, but to circle around it and like try to get the reader to have their own, like come to their own understanding of whatever it is that is being circled around. Chapter 2. Waiting for the Revolution. How is it that the world turned upside down always manages to right itself? Capital R here. Why does reaction always follow revolution, like seasons in hell? Uprising, or the Latin form insurrection. Okay, I'll just say that this is like a good question. Basically, the kind of idea here is that when you have a revolution that fails, or a revolution that is not a proletarian revolution, then it's going to, the reactionary right forces are going to take advantage of the kind of like opening that the revolution has made, the kind of breach in the status quo, and like there is a right-wing advantage in such situations because it's simply easier to be reactionary than to be progressive and try to invent something new. So there is like a tendency, I think, for things to, like the right wing has an advantage. Uprising, or the Latin form insurrection, are words used by historians to label failed revolutions. Movements which do not match the expected curve, the consensus-approved trajectory, Revolution, reaction, betrayal, the founding of a stronger and even more oppressive state. The turning of the wheel, the return of history again and again to its highest form, jackboot on the face of humanity forever. This is totally this is not, I don't consent to this depiction of historical trajectories. Revolution, reaction, betrayal, the founding of a stronger and even more oppressive state. If you look at what happened in China or the Soviet Empire, this is not what happened. This is what happened from the perspective of an anti-communist. It's so disappointing, and it's just it's like presenting a skewed understanding of history and not allowing for a different interpretation. There is no intimation here of a different way to interpret these events. This is presented as fact or as some kind of a necessity, such that the reader is being led down a very confined path here, where there's no alternative possibility to how it is being depicted here. By failing to follow this curve, the uprising suggests the possibility of a movement outside and beyond the Hegelian spiral of that progress, which is secretly nothing more than a vicious circle. Surgo, rise up, surge. Insurgo, rise up, raise oneself up. A bootstrap operation. A goodbye to that wretched parody of the karmic round, historical revolutionary futility. The slogan, revolution, has mutated from toxin to toxin. A malign pseudo-Gnostic fate trap, a nightmare where no matter how we struggle, we never escape that evil aeon, that incubus, the state, one state after another, every heaven ruled by yet one more evil angel. I don't really know what the hell this means. A malign pseudo-Gnostic fate trap, a nightmare where no matter how we struggle, we never escape that evil aeon. That incubus, the state, one state after another. Oh my god. He's just an idiot. He's just a friggin' anarchist who has no understanding of revolutionary theory, of historical materialism, of the dictatorship of the proletariat, frankly. If history is time, as it claims to be, then the uprising is a moment that springs up and out of time, violates the law of history. If the state is history, as it claims to be, then the insurrection is the forbidden moment, an unforgivable denial of the dialectic, shimmying up the pole and out of the smoke hole, a shaman's maneuver carried out at an impossible angle to the universe. History says the revolution attains permanence, or at least duration, while the uprising is temporary. In this sense, an uprising is like a peak experience, as opposed to the standard of ordinary consciousness and experience. Like festivals, uprisings cannot happen every day, otherwise they would not be non-ordinary. But such moments of intensity give shape and meaning to the entirety of a life. The shaman returns. You can't stay up on the roof forever, but things have changed, shifts and integrations have occurred, a difference is made. I'll just say about this idea that the uprising is a peak experience is, again, not really true, I think. An uprising is not a peak experience because an uprising is instrumental to attaining a revolution. A revolution is a peak experience, and insofar as a revolution is trying to let's say a communist revolution or a socialist revolution is trying to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat to take control of the means of production and institute an actually existing socialist state, then that experience is always going to be rising towards the telos of communism. The uprising is not the peak experience. Especially as in opposition to the standard of ordinary consciousness and experience. Like, communism is a complete reversal. We can't say what communism is because we are so mired in ordinary consciousness and experience that we can't even really speak about what humanity is, what human nature is, because we are just so enmeshed in this mortal coil. You will argue that this is a counsel of despair. What of the anarchist dream, the stateless state, the commune, the autonomous zone with duration, a free society, a free culture? Are we to abandon that hope in return for some existentialist acte gratuit? The point is not to change consciousness, but to change the world. I accept this as a fair criticism. I make two rejoinders nevertheless. First, revolution has never yet resulted in achieving this dream. Which dream? The stateless state. What about the Paris Commune? But anyway, I'm really having a hard time reading this just because it's an anarchist shit. It's not communist. So I'm having a hard time coming at this because I am critical of it on every premise, on every basis. I don't really know how to. I'm trying my best to be fair to it, but I just disagree with it fundamentally. I think that a state is necessary in the interim before attaining peak communism. I accept this as a fair criticism. I'd make two rejoinders nevertheless. First, revolution has never yet resulted in achieving this dream. The vision comes to life in the moment of uprising, but as soon as the revolution triumphs and the state returns, the dream and the ideal are already betrayed. I feel like this is such a key aspect, or I don't even know. I shouldn't assume that this guy is speaking for all anarchists, but I feel like this is extreme anarchism, or just shitty anarchism. The idea that the uprising and the experience of the uprising, the festival kind of experience, the kind of coming together and breaking through ordinary consciousness and busting down all the taboos and all that kind of shit, that is all that anarchists can really imagine. That is their revolution, is the idea of just unleashing chaos or something, or maybe that's not being very generous, but the idea of just having this kind of festival, this festival style insurrection where all of these standard laws that enforce the kind of social hierarchies that anarchists are against, breaking those down is all they can really imagine. But actually trying to come up with a plan for society and how to get there is just beyond their ken. So it's just this constant glorification of the revolution as an insurrection, as some kind of festival, some kind of experience. I have not given up hope or even expectation of change, but I distrust the word revolution. Second, even if we replace the revolutionary approach with a concept of insurrection blossoming spontaneously into anarchist culture, our own particular historical situation is not propitious for such a vast undertaking. Absolutely nothing but a futile martyrdom could possibly result now from a head-on collision with the terminal state, the mega-corporate information state, the empire of spectacle and simulation. Its guns are all pointed at us, while our meager weaponry finds nothing to aim at but a hysteresis, a rigid vacuity, a spook capable of smothering every spark in an ectoplasm of information, a society of capitulation ruled by the image of the cop and the absorbent eye of the TV screen. this is kind of why back in my anarchist phase I was really interested in Tikkun and the Invisible Committee who like draw more explicitly and more like academically in a more like sustained and rigorous way on postmodern philosophy, especially people like Foucault and Deleuze and Guattari, who do a lot of theorizing of how of this kind of thing, about how like this state has like more power than any kind of insurrectionary movement, and at the same time how the state is like dependent on this rigid vacuity, like this this non-presence. State power is at its best when it is invisible. It's like a classic concepts from, I don't know, Introduction to Civil War or something. Maybe I'll read that someday. It's kind of more interesting. Less Orientalist. In short, we're not touting the Taz as an exclusive end in itself, replacing all other forms of organization, tactics, and goals. Excuse me. We recommend it because it can provide the quality of enhancement associated with the uprising without necessarily leading to violence and martyrdom. The Taz is like an uprising which does not engage directly with the state, a guerrilla operation which liberates an area of land, of time, of imagination, and then dissolves itself to reform elsewhere/elsewhen before the state can crush it. Because the state is concerned primarily with simulation rather than substance, the Taz can occupy these areas clandestinely and carry on its festal purposes for quite a while in relative peace. Perhaps certain small Tazes have lasted whole lifetimes because they went unnoticed, like hillbilly enclaves. Because they never intersected with the spectacle, never appeared outside that real life which is invisible to the agents of simulation. It's like an uprising which does not engage directly with the state. It's completely futile, not replicable, not socially sanctionable. It's really just not a political program. Having something that does not directly engage with the state, you're basically setting up like an elitist, exclusive, like gated community almost. Babylon takes its abstractions for realities. Precisely within this margin of error, the Taz can come into existence. I don't know what that means. Getting the Taz started may involve tactics of violence and defense, but its greatest strength lies in its invisibility. The state cannot recognize it because history has no definition of it. As soon as the Taz is named, represented, mediated, it must vanish. It will vanish, leaving behind it an empty husk, only to spring up again somewhere else, once again invisible because undefinable in terms of the spectacle. The Taz is thus a perfect tactic for an era in which the state is omnipresent and all-powerful, and yet simultaneously riddled with cracks and vacancies. And because the Taz is a microcosm of that anarchist dream of a free culture, I can think of no better tactic by which to work toward that goal while at the same time experiencing some of its benefits here and now. I feel like this is very like Foucauldian, the way that he doesn't want to name or represent the Taz, because to do so would be to like define it in some kind of absolute term, or some kind of term that is that the state can mediate between, some kind of term that will have like a mediating element between it and the state. Like if the Taz is going to be like a political program that you're going to theorize as being able to like take down state power in some way, then it needs to have like a common basis between it and the state. But to do so would be to undermine it, because then the state could just eradicate it with its superior weapons, or I mean whatever the hell he's saying here. I feel like he's saying something more abstract, but like the idea that I don't know, if you define it in that kind of sense, then its power will, I don't know, disappear. I don't fucking know. In sum, realism demands not only that we give up waiting for the revolution, but also that we give up wanting it. Uprising, yes, as often as possible and even at the risk of violence. The spasming of the simulated state will be spectacular, but in most cases the best and most radical tactic will be to refuse to engage in spectacular violence, to withdraw from the area of simulation, to disappear. He's just like defining a concept or like conceptualizing something that has absolutely no political content. Like, there's no way to connect Taz's, to advance the Taz as like a socially replicable thing, as something that can like connect up and like gain its own kind of power, because its own kind of power that can like take on the state or the status quo or whatever, because to do so would be to come into relation with the state, would be to become visible to the state, and then it would just get crushed. Like that is a fair concern, because any uprising will have inferior firepower to the state, and will therefore like any uprising should be concerned about how it relates to the state. But unless you're like, there are ways around that. I think I made a vlog when I was reading this about the concept of a protracted people's war, which really like addresses that kind of concern, but is still able to gain sustained power. It still has like a coherent identity. It still is like one thing that is like gaining power. It's a counter power, counter hegemony. The Taz is an encampment of guerrilla ontologists. Strike and run away. Keep moving the entire tribe, even its only data in the web. The Taz must be capable of defense, but both the strike and the defense should, if possible, evade the violence of the state, which is no longer a meaningful violence. The strike is made at structures of control, essentially at ideas. The defense is invisibility, a martial art, and invulnerability, an occult art within the martial arts. The nomadic war machine conquers without being noticed and moves on before the map can be adjusted. As to the future, only the autonomous can plan autonomy, organize for it, create it. It's a bootstrap operation. The first step is somewhat akin to Satori, the realization that the Taz begins with the simple act of realization. Whatever. It's impossible. Here he's like explicitly saying that the Taz it has to be a spontaneous thing. There's no way for it to come about through like a concerted work amongst the masses. This is a really like a terrible essay here. And it's actually pretty well written, despite all the Orientalism, which is, I think, like a symptom of the times. Like it was a symptom of like the Belle Epoque in the late 19th century, but for some reason, I wonder why it came back, I feel, in this period of time. Like the Illuminatus trilogy is very Orientalist as well. Chapter 3. The Psychotopology of Everyday Life. The concept of the Taz arises first out of a critique of revolution and an appreciation of the insurrection. The former labels the latter a failure, but for an us uprising represents a far more interesting possibility from the standard of a psychology of liberation than all the successful revolutions of bourgeoisie, communists, fascists, etc. A psychology of liberation. Not in any way like a material like basis or institution or whatever of liberation, but a psychology of liberation. Typical anarchists, like they're all about like lifestyle shit and like killing the cop in your head or whatever, but not actually about like actually erecting structures, material structures that will like really influence people's lives. The second generating force behind the TAS springs from the historical development I call the closure of the map. The last bit of earth unclaimed by any nation-state was eaten up in 1899. Ours is the first century without terra incognita, without a frontier. Nationality is the highest principle of world governance. Not one speck of rock in the South Seas can be left open. Not one remote valley, not even the moon and planets. This is the apotheosis of territorial gangsterism. Not one square inch of earth goes unpoliced or untaxed, in theory. The map is a political abstract grid, a gigantic con enforced by the carrot/stick conditioning of the expert state. Until, for most of us, the map becomes the territory, no longer Turtle Island, but the USA. Yet, because the map is an abstraction, it cannot cover Earth with one-to-one accuracy. Within the fractal complexities of actual geography, the map can see only dimensional grids. Hidden in folded immensities escape the measuring rod. The map is not accurate. The map cannot be accurate. So, revolution is closed, but insurgency is open. For the time being, we concentrate our force on temporary power surges, avoiding all entanglements with permanent solutions. And the map is closed, but the autonomous zone is open. Let's try to actually spend some time with this paragraph here. The map is a political abstract grid, a gigantic con enforced by the carrot-stick conditioning of the expert state, until for most of us the map becomes the territory, no longer Turtle Island, but the USA. Yes, the idea here is that, Turtle Island is going to refer to like the actual land itself, but the USA is like an ideological construct. The map is, in a sense, ideological, and because we are so enmeshed in ideology, the map, or the abstract concept, the ideological concept, the USA, takes over from any actual understanding of or any appreciation or knowledge of the actual land and the territory. Yet because the map is an abstraction, it cannot cover Earth with one-to-one accuracy. Within the fractal complexities of actual geography, the map can... this is not actually true. It definitely can, in theory. Within the fractal complexities of actual geography, the map can see only dimensional grids. Hidden in folded immensities escape the measuring rod. The map is not accurate. The map cannot be accurate. Alright, fair enough, whatever. Reminds me of that Borges story about the map that became as big as the thing as mapping. So, revolution is closed, but insurgency is open. I don't understand how that follows at all. How does revolution relate to the map? For the time being, we concentrate our force on temporary power searches, avoiding all entanglements with permanent solutions. The fuck? And the map is closed, but the autonomous zone is open. Metaphorically, it unfolds within the fractal dimensions, invisible to the cartography of control. This is I feel like he just read the book Foucault by Deleuze, which talks a lot about cartography and archiving and everything in a very abstract sense. It's a much better book than anything Foucault ever wrote. And here we should introduce the concept of psychotopology and topography as an alternative science to that of the state's surveying and map-making and psychic imperialism. Only psychotopography can draw one-to-one maps of reality because only the human mind provides sufficient complexity to model the real. But a one-to-one map cannot control its territory because it is virtually identical with its territory. It can only be used to suggest, in a sense gesture toward, certain features. And the map is closed, but the autonomous zone is open. Metaphorically, it unfolds within the fractal dimensions, invisible to the cartography of control. And here we should introduce the concept of psychotopology and topography as an alternative science to that of the state surveying and mapping and psychic empiricism. So I guess, psychotopology is Only psychotopography can draw one-to-one maps of reality because only the human mind provides sufficient complexity to model the real. That's fucking such nonsense. Like, this is totally fantasy. Like, it doesn't actually fucking mean anything. There's no argument here. You think the human mind can actually map with one-to-one accuracy like a piece of land? That is completely fucking ridiculous. A photograph would have a much better job doing that, or like some highly precise mapping instrument that can like locate each atom present in a piece of territory. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. But a one-to-one map cannot control its territory because it is virtually identical with its territory. It can only be used to suggest, in a sense, gesture towards certain features. We are looking for spaces, geographic, social, cultural, imaginal. With potential to flower as autonomous zones, and we are looking for times in which these spaces are relatively open, either through neglect on the part of the state or because they have somehow escaped notice by the mapmakers, or for whatever reason. Psychotopology is the art of dowsing for potential tazes. Either through neglect or the part of the state, or because they have somehow escaped notice by the mapmakers, or for whatever reason. I guess the idea here is that, the cartography of control, the state mapmakers cannot draw like a fully accurate map of reality or of whatever territory is in question, but the human mind is able to draw a more accurate map, or a more detailed map at least, and we can use it to find spaces that are open to insurrection. I mean, I guess there's something in that. Like the idea that, because I guess he's saying that there is more to a space, there's more to a territory than its actual physical features. Like a city, that you can map it quite accurately in physical terms according to the cartography of control, like the streets and the alleys and the sidewalks and all the buildings and all their functions and whatever, and all the weird spaces kind of in between spaces. But then a human mind is able to understand, because all of those spaces have functions, and they have extra meaning that is not contained strictly in their physical features. So the human mind is able to map onto a particular street corner that has a long history of being used as a rallying point or something. So whatever. I guess I understand the idea of psychogeography. It's just looking at a map and understanding the human history that is contained in there, rather than strictly limiting it to the physical features. The closures of revolution and of the map, however, are only the negative sources of the Taz. Much remains to be said of its positive inspirations. Reaction alone cannot provide the energy needed to manifest a Taz. An uprising must be for something as well. 1. First, we can speak of a natural anthropology of the Taz. The nuclear family is the base unit of consensus society, but not of the Taz. Families, how I hate them, the misers of love. Gide. The nuclear family, with its attendant Oedipal miseries, appears to have been a Neolithic invention, a response to the agricultural revolution with its imposed scarcity and its imposed hierarchy. The Paleolithic model is at once more primal and more radical, the band. The typical hunter-gatherer nomadic or semi-nomadic band consists of about 50 people. Within larger tribal societies, the band structure is fulfilled by clans within the tribe. or by sodalities such as initiatic or secret societies, hunt or war societies, gender societies, children's republics, and so on. If the nuclear family is produced by scarcity and results in miserliness, the band is produced by abundance and results in prodigality. The family is closed by genetics, by the male's possession of women and children, by the hierarchic totality of agricultural industrial society. The band is open, not to everyone, of course, but to the affinity group, the initiates sworn to a bond of love. The band is not part of a larger hierarchy, but rather part of a horizontal pattern of custom, extended kinship, contract and alliance, spiritual affinities, etc. American Indian society preserves certain aspects of this structure even now. I guess this is like a pretty decent paragraph, and I think that it would fit with a lot of like contemporary theorizing against the nuclear family. But I feel like it has fallen out of fashion a little bit to draw these kind of comparisons to Paleolithic models and whatnot. Because like to look backward like that is reaction. It's the definition of reactionary. You gotta look forward in some way. In our own post-spectacular society of simulation, many forces are working, largely invisibly, to phase out the nuclear family and bring back the band. Breakdowns in the structure of work resonate in the shattered stability of the unit home and a unit family. One's band nowadays includes friends, ex-spouses, and lovers, people met at different jobs and powwows, affinity groups, special interest networks, male networks, etc. Excuse me. The nuclear family becomes more and more obviously a trap, a cultural sinkhole, a neurotic secret implosion of split atoms, and the obvious counter-strategy emerges spontaneously in the almost unconscious rediscovery of the more archaic and yet more post-industrial possibility of the band. The nuclear family becomes more and more obviously a trap, a cultural sinkhole, a neurotic secret implosion of split atoms, and the obvious counter-strategy. I guess he's kind of responding to what I just said, but it also like points to how concepts of the band are actually like ripe for exploitation by the present neoliberal regime, just like everything else. Like that is what neoliberalism does, is like appropriate and integrate transgressive forces into its own order. But I feel like they're like this idea of a band as like more prodigious and more open. It's actually very much in line with neoliberalism, and like it just goes to show how like concepts like this, taken absent any kind of like critique of like a material political critique of like economy, I guess, it does not actually like give you anything. It does not point the way towards any kind of emancipation. It is just giving ammo to the enemy. Like you need to pair a concept like this, you need to integrate it into a wider political critique that is able to like understand how the nuclear family fits into and supports like the capitalist social order, and then also understand how like a disintegration of the nuclear family and like an integration of a band as like a social unit is not in itself going to undermine capitalism in any way, but you need to integrate a band, the concept of a band, into like a wider political economical critique, because like it just doesn't do anything on its own. Because like when it's isolated like this, it is just a sitting duck. 2. The Taz as festival. Stephen Pearl Andrews once offered, as an image of anarchist society, the dinner party, in which all structure of authority dissolves in conviviality and celebration. See Appendix C. Here we might also invoke Fourier and his concept of the senses as the basis of social becoming, Touchroot and gastrosophy, and his paean to the neglected implications of smell and taste. The ancient concepts of Jubilee and Saturnalia originate in an intuition that certain events lie outside the scope of profane time, the measuring rod of the state and of history. These holidays literally occupied gaps in the calendar, intercalary intervals. By the Middle Ages, nearly a third of the year was given over to the holidays. Perhaps the riots against calendar reform had less to do with the 11 lost days than with a sense of that imperial science was conspiring to close up these gaps in the calendar where the people's freedoms had accumulated. A coup d'etat, a mapping of the year, a seizure of time itself, turning the organic cosmos into a clockwork universe, the death of the festival. Just taking the time. Participants in insurrection invariably note its festive aspects, even in the midst of armed struggle, danger, and risk. The uprising is like a Saturnalia which has slipped loose, or been forced to vanish, from its intercalary interval, and is now at liberty to pop up anywhere or when. Freed of time and place, it nevertheless possesses a nose for the ripeness of events, and an affinity for the genius loci. The science of psychotopology indicates flows of forces and spots of power, to borrow occultist metaphors, which localize the Taz spatio-temporally, or at least help to define its relation to moment and locale. I don't know what the hell is going on here. Participants in insurrection invariably note its festive aspects, even in the midst of armed struggle, danger, and risk. That's certainly true. Like, I've been in enough insurrections to know that there is this kind of, it's just like the adrenaline and like fighting against power. It's very exciting and exhilarating. The uprising is like a Saturnalia which has slipped loose or been forced to vanish from its intercalary interval and is now at liberty to pop up anywhere or when. I guess the idea is that the Saturnalia happens at like the equinox or whatever. I don't know. It's like the Saturnalia is a festival that is tied to a specific astrological occasion, so it happens at the same time every year or whatever. But the Taz is not tied to any calendar event. It's at liberty to pop up anywhere or when. Freed of time and place, it nevertheless possesses a nose for the ripeness of events and an affinity for the genius loci. Even though it can pop up anywhere or any when, it's not tied to a specific calendar event. The festival of the insurrection is tied to general social atmosphere and the possibility of insurrection in amongst the people themselves. The science of psychotopology indicates flows of forces and spots of power, which localize the Taz spatio-temporally, at least helps define its relation to moment, locale, whatever. The media invite us to come celebrate the moments of your life with the spurious unification of commodity and spectacle, the famous non-event of pure representation. In response to this obscenity, we have, on the one hand, the spectrum of refusal, chronicled by the situationists John Zerzan, Bob Black et al., and on the other hand, the emergence of a festal culture removed and even hidden from the would-be managers of our leisure. Fight for the right to party is in fact not a parody of the radical struggle, but a new manifestation of it, appropriate to an age which offers TVs and telephones as ways to reach out and touch other human beings, ways to be there. Whatever. Pearl Andrews was right. The dinner party is already the seed of the new society taking shape within the shell of the old. The 60s-style tribal gathering, the forest conclave of eco-saboteurs, the idyllic Beltane of the neo-pagans, anarchist conferences, gay fairy circles, Harlem rent parties of the 20s, nightclubs, banquets, old-time liberation picnics. We should realize that all these are already liberated zones of a sort, or at least potential Tazes. Whether open only to a few friends, like a dinner party, or to thousands of celebrants, like a be-in, the party is always open because it is not ordered. It may be planned, but unless it happens, it's a failure. The element of spontaneity is crucial. Yeah, also I would just like to go through these and see which ones are political and which ones are not. Eco-saboteur is political. They have a political program, so they're meeting to achieve a particular end which fits into like a general social program. A general political economic program. The idyllic Beltane of the neo-pagans. I don't know what the hell that is. I don't think it's political. Anarchist conferences, sure it's political, but in a bad way. Gay fairy circles, I don't know what that is. Harlem rent parties, definitely, those are just instrumental. I mean, just trying to get rent paid rather than be evicted, they're instrumental of necessity, and whether or not they're tied to a political program, I can't say. I don't know. It's not any evidence here. Nightclubs, banquets, old-time liberation picnics, these are all just parties. They're not insurrections. The essence of the party. Face to face, a group of humans synergize their efforts to realize mutual desires, whether for good food and cheer, dance, conversation, the arts of life, perhaps even for erotic pleasure, or to create a communal artwork, or to attain the very transport of bliss. In short, a union of egoists, as Stirner put it, in its simplest form, or else, in Kropotkin's terms, a basic biological drive to mutual aid. Here we should also mention Bataille's economy of excess and his theory of potlatch culture. Whatever. 3. Vital in shaping Taz reality is the concept of psychic nomadism, or as we jokingly call it, rootless cosmopolitanism. Aspects of this phenomenon have been discussed by Deleuze and Guattari in Nomadology and the War Machine, by Lyotard in Driftworks, and by various authors in the Oasis issue of Semiotext. We use the term psychic nomadism here rather than urban nomadism, nomadology, driftwork, etc., simply in order to garner all these concepts into a single loose complex to be studied in light of the coming into being of the Taz. The death of God, in some ways a decentering of the entire European project, opened a multi-perspectived post-ideological worldview able to move rootlessly from philosophy to tribal myth, from natural science to Taoism, able to see for the first time through eyes like some golden insects, each facet giving a view of an entirely other world. Oops. Whatever. Post-ideological worldview, my ass. It's just privilege. It's just an expression of privilege. But this vision was attained at the expense of inhabiting an epoch where speed and commodity fetishism have created a tyrannical false unity which tends to blur all cultural diversity and individuality so that one place is as good as another. This paradox creates gypsies, psychic travelers driven by desire or curiosity, wanderers with shallow loyalties, in fact disloyal to the European project, which has lost all its charm and vitality, not tied down to any particular time and place, in search of diversity and adventure. This description covers not only the X-class artists and intellectuals, but also migrant laborers, refugees, the homeless, tourists, the RV and mobile home culture, also people who travel via the net, but may never leave their own rooms, or those like Thoreau who have traveled much in Concord. And finally, it includes everybody, all of us, living through our automobiles, our vacations, our TVs, books, movies, telephones, changing jobs, changing lifestyles, religions, diets, etc., etc. Psychic nomadism as a tactic, what Deleuze and Guattari metaphorically call the war machine, shifts the paradox from a passive to an active and perhaps even violent mode. God's last throes and deathbed rattles have been going on for such a long time, in the form of capitalism, fascism, and communism, for example, that there's still a lot of creative destruction to be carried out by post-Bakuninist, post-Nietzschean commandos or Apaches, literally enemies of the old consensus. These nomads practice the razzia. They are corsairs, they are viruses. They have both need and desire for tazes, camps of black tents under the desert stars, interzones, hidden fortified oases along secret caravan routes, liberated bits of jungle and badland, no-go areas, black markets, and underground bazaars. These nomads chart their courses by strange stars, which might be luminous clusters of data in cyberspace or perhaps hallucinations. Lay down a map of the land. Over that, set a map of political change. Over that, a map of the net, especially the counter-net, with its emphasis on clandestine information flow and logistics. And finally, overall, the one-to-one map of the creative imagination, aesthetics, values. The resultant grid comes to life, animated by unexpected eddies and surges of energy, coagulations of light, secret tunnels, surprises. I mean, I guess it's pretty well written. I have to give it that. But obviously, as I've been saying throughout this, it is completely this theory of the Taz is completely divorced from any kind of political program, and therefore it does not have any kind of social potential. It can't really be replicated, and it can't come together. It cannot provide a real counterpower to state power. I mean, unless it develops, but I think I've read enough to know that much at least. Anyway, we've been going for about an hour, a bit more. Just finish a chapter. If you want to see me read more of this, if you enjoyed this program, please let me know. I'm going to try to do more readings like this where I actually talk and give some thoughts and opinions on what I'm reading. I'm still developing it as a concept for content, trying to come up with videos that will be more interesting to people, more watchable, but at the same time still interesting to me. It's still something that I want to do. I'm interested in reading theory, reading political theory, so I want to start with this just because I thought it'd be easy to make fun of and just relatively easy to read. It has been so far, but anyway, if you made it this far, if you like this video and you want to see me finish off the essay, generally, I mean, I'm sure I will, just because I don't like not finishing readings, even if I'm not enjoying them. I mean, I didn't really expect to enjoy this, but I don't like not finishing things, so I'll probably continue with this. But if you like this, please let me know. Drop a comment, get in touch. Yeah, it's just nice to know that people are watching, if people are in fact watching. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Picking up on chapter 4.